Hey there, Endurance Junkie. It is bloody good to have you here on the Exponential Performance Podcast, talking all things performance and how you can train smarter to get the best out of yourself. On today's show, we're going to dig into cycling performance. Where is it best to spend your hard-earned money and time to improve your on-the-bike performance? We also dig into cardiovascular issues with endurance athletes. Is this a myth or is it actually true? And then we're talking about what's more important, the body or the mind? How can you train yourself to push through that pain barrier? Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Exponential Performance Podcast. Join sports scientist and performance coach Maddie Graham to find out how to train smarter and maximize your performance no matter who you are.
Alrighty, let's jump into this thing. Episode 7 of the Exponential Performance Podcast. So just a bit of a follow-up from last week's podcast, episode 6, in which I talked about the use of gelatin and using that for ligament and tendon injuries, because it's been found in the research to increase the collagen production. Now, I had quite a lot of people asking me about the source of gelatin that I was using and if using collagen hydrolysate or hydrolyzed collagen would be better. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on the differences between gelatin and collagen hydrolysate. So gelatin, you can, and I did, and that's what they used in the research, just the stuff from the supermarket. So you can just buy it from the supermarket in a little packet, and it's really, really cheap compared to, say, collagen hydrolysate that comes from the pharmacy or a health food store, which the price goes up exponentially compared to gelatin from the supermarket. So what is the difference? The source is the same, no matter if it's gelatin or collagen hydrolysate or hydrolyzed collagen, as it's sometimes called as well. The source is the same. It's still coming from bone, skin, or skin of animals. And there is also some use of scales from fish sources in that as well. So the gelatin that was used in the research that we reviewed last week was using beef skin as their source of gelatin. But there are other sources out there. So what is the difference? The source is the same. What about the amino acid profile? If it is from the same source, let's say in this case beef, the amino acid profile is exactly the same between gelatin and collagen hydrolysate or hydrolyzed collagen. There is no difference. The only difference is that collagen hydrolysate has been broken down further. Okay, so it's the same stuff, it's just been processed more into, let's say, smaller bits compared to the gelatin. The real differences come with how it actually responds in the real world, in the kitchen almost. For gelatin, true gelatin only dissolves in hot water. So if you try mixing gelatin into cold water, you'll find it gets a little bit lumpy. And the first time I did, use gelatin, this is what I did. I just mixed it up with some cold juice, and there was lumpy bits in it. What I do now is I mix it in with hot water, so it dissolves up a little bit better, and then I pour the cold water in on top of that, and you get quite a good mix as long as it doesn't cool down too much. Collagen hydrolysate, on the other hand, dissolves in both hot and cold water. Okay, so you can mix collagen hydrolysate into cold water, doesn't get lumpy, mixes up fine. Slightly better texture, some might say. And then gelatin causes liquids to turn into gel, and that's why it's used in, jelly, in gummy bears, that sort of thing. That's why those turn into a jelly gummy substance, because of the gelatin. Collagen hydrolysate, on the other hand, because of the process of breaking it down, it no longer causes liquids to turn into gels. So those are the main difference between gelatin and collagen hydrolysate. In terms of the amino acid profile, which is what we are really interested in and is the key concern for using it for collagen production in the body. The amino acid profile is identical, so there's no need to worry about that. Depending on the source, it may be slightly different between different animals. However, apart from that, the only difference really is the way it dissolves and what it actually does, turning that liquid into a gel solid form. So hopefully that clears up the questions about collagen versus gelatin. If you have any more questions about it, or you've started using it to help sort out a little niggly tendon issue, let me know. Always interested to hear from you guys. How's my tendon injuries going at the moment? Really good, actually. This is the best week that I've felt. So I've been on the gelatin supplementation for about 2 weeks now, along with the skipping exercise and also some eccentric and isometric work in the gym to help sort these out. I really want to get on top of these because they are very, very niggly. So enough about that. Let's get into things today, and we're going to kick off with a myth buster section. So here it is. Over the last few years, there has been quite a lot of publicity around athletes with heart problems and even athletes dying because of sudden, cardiac issues. And this led to a lot of speculation, I guess, around, athletes and having these problems. And a lot of people think that they might be linked, i.e. the training that elite athletes do may lead to these heart issues. And what I wanted to do in Mythbuster today was just have a bit of talk about this, because it doesn't seem that it's actually correct. And I was reading through a wee article on the British Journal of Sports Medicine when I came across this interesting thing. And what it is they did some like long-term research and bit of data analysis and gathering up a bunch of different results and that sort of thing. And what they came up with is that they found that elite athletes aren't actually at any higher risk of developing cardiovascular abnormalities compared to the average person. And this was quite interesting and kind of promising as well, because I think a lot of people were scared off when this first came out, that if I do too much endurance training, it's actually bad for me, bad for my heart. And there is a level of cardiac remodeling that happens in comparison to, say, non-athletes, and this is just simply the left and right ventricle get larger, and there's also a thickening of the heart wall depending on whether you're a strength athlete or an endurance athlete. So the heart actually does get bigger, but these changes are largely benign, and they found that looking at former elite and amateur athletes aged 40 to 70 years old, although they found this pattern of cardiac remodeling, these changes were quite benign and they did not have any difference in other cardiac biomarkers that would suggest that there is an issue with their heart. So it's quite good to know as well. And then also another study looked at these adaptations or changes in the heart in elite masters endurance athletes with a training history of 29 years on average. So they'd been training for a long time, banked up a lot of endurance training, and they found no difference between these athletes and a control group of non-athletes for either right or left ventricle volumes or cardiac biomarkers. So they found no difference. Whether you've done a bunch of endurance training or not, you're not at any increased risk of having these cardiovascular abnormalities. And that's quite promising, because it seemed to have scared a lot of people off when they first released, when the stuff in the media kept coming out about a lot of high profile endurance athletes having heart problems, and people were put off by it. But there doesn't seem to be any reason to be scared. In fact, an epidemiological study that analysed 15,174 Olympic medalists, that was found that these Olympic medalists lived on average 2.8 years more than the average population, independent of their country of origin or the type of sport that they performed. So it seems that there is not any increased risk, or any reason to worry about your training and in terms of endurance activity causing heart problems, and that these heart problems that have been coming out in these high profile athletes were potentially underlying or there already, and just their endurance training or endurance racing competition have brought these to the surface. If they had been a sedentary individual, these probably would have gone unnoticed and wouldn't have caused them any problem. It was just when they wanted to push their limit. In saying that, if you think you have any issues with your heart, or you've got any worry about it at all, go and get it checked out by your doctor, get referred to a cardiologist, and get these things figured out, because you don't want them obviously causing problems if you do have underlying risk factors. So there you have it. Mythbuster for today. Elite athletes are at no higher risk of developing cardiovascular abnormalities compared to the average person. Let's crack into lessons from the lab. It's alive! It's alive! In this week's Lessons from the Lab, I wanted to talk about improving cycling performance and how we should spend our time and money. Most of this information comes from a research paper titled Improving Cycling Performance, How We Should Spend Our Time and Money. And what it did is it was a bit of a meta-analysis of all of the research, or a lot of the research that was done around cycling performance and what gave the biggest gains in performance. So what they've done is they've used mathematical modeling to test a whole bunch of different factors. So there's internal factors such as training, altitude training, carbohydrate and caffeine, and then also external factors, body weight, body position, clothing, bicycle, and also wheels. And so what they did is scoured the research, found all of these different results from different studies. So rather than just relying on one study to give the information, they searched out a bunch of different studies, and then they used those results to inform a little bit of a model, or to help build a little bit of a model. And this model's been validated in terms of predicting power output and actual power measured in outdoor road cycling. And it's found to be quite accurate. So the mathematical model takes into account a bunch of different factors. So what they did is they plugged a bunch of different numbers in, and they got results of how much time you would save in a 40-kilometer time trial. So this is not applicable to everything, and we'll talk about that as we go, because it was a time trial, not, say, a road race. So there is a few caveats to this, and we will talk about those as we go through. So what I want to do is just walk through this and have a look at the different factors and how much performance change they found for a novice, an intermediate, and an elite cyclist. Overall, novices have the most to gain out of those three groups, and that's because they're the least well trained, so any change is going to have a bigger difference. At the elite level, the changes that you make just give you small marginal gains. Those marginal gains obviously add up over time to produce, the winning margin, and the winning margin is smaller. But overall, novices have the most to gain here. And so the first variable that they looked at, or the first factor, was training. And what they found is that performance can increase up to about 5 to 10% in novice cyclists. And that's a training program that includes high-intensity intervals and sustained endurance efforts. So you get about a 5 to 10% increase in performance on that 40-kilometer time trial. For those athletes that are well-trained or intermediate, there's room for about a 2 to 4% improvement with training. And elite athletes, there's a smaller improvement there of about 1 to 3%. So training has the ability to have the biggest change in performance, but as you improve your performance and you become a better athlete, the actual amount that you can improve decreases. It's called the law of diminishing returns. The more you do something, the smaller the gains are. So the next variable they looked at was altitude training, and they scoured the research, and what they came up with is that training at altitude, depending on the method, we're looking at the ones that work, which you typically live high, train low, so the athletes live at altitude, then come down to lower altitudes to train so that their training intensity is not sacrificed, may elicit approximately 2% increase in performance. So what does that look like in the real world? It's a 34-second decrease in a 40-kilometer time trial for novice cyclists, and about a 26-second decrease in time for the trained cyclist, and 23-second decrease in time for the elite cyclist. So they're going about 23 to 34 seconds faster, depending on if you're novice or elite. Now, the thing with altitude training is you can see there, the 2% increase in performance comes at quite a high price. Unless you live at altitude, the ability to do altitude training is quite expensive. Whether you've got to travel somewhere to the top of the mountain, sleep up there, commute down the hill, or use supplementary oxygen while at altitude to train, the cost is quite high for that 2% increase versus training where you can get up to a 10% increase in performance if you're a novice athlete. Moving on from altitude training, let's have a look at nutrition. Ingesting carbohydrate may increase 40-kilometer time trial performance power by 2 to 3%. Okay, 2 to 3%. So it's quite significant. So for a novice cyclist, you're looking at around a 42-second decrease in time. So you're going 42 seconds faster. For the well-trained cyclist, it's about 36 seconds. And for elite level athletes, we're looking at about a 32-second decrease in time for that 40-kilometer time trial. So using carbohydrate for the 40-kilometer time trial, you're getting quite good improvements there. So definitely good bang for your buck. If you just nail that nutrition on race day, you're going to be going faster. And the other nutrition sort of aspect they looked at was caffeine. And what they found was caffeine had similar effects in relatively untrained cyclists and elite cyclists. So no matter who you were, you got about an increase of about 5% in performance across the board. Your power increased about 5%. So what does that look like in the real world? If you're a novice cyclist, you're getting about an 84-second improvement in your time. 84-second, which is huge. If you're a well-trained cyclist, you got about a 63-second improvement, so just over a minute off your time. And for elite level cyclists, you're getting about a 55-second improvement in performance. So caffeine, again, very good bang for your buck in terms of the input into it and the results that you get from it. They also looked at the changes in bike mass and also body mass. And what they found here was that depending on the terrain, if you had a flat time trial course, bicycle weight doesn't really matter at all. If you had a bike that weighed 7 kgs versus 10 kgs on the lighter bike, for a 40-kilometer time trial, that is largely flat. A novice cyclist is only going to improve their time by about 13 seconds. 13 seconds. A trained cyclist, only about 7 seconds, and an elite athlete, only about 5 seconds. So you can change your frame and decrease your bike weight by 3 kilograms, but you're only going to get a very small improvement in performance. This is quite encouraging for those that ride, say, maybe an older, heavier bike or don't want to invest in the latest equipment. You're not actually going to get much return for the cost of investing in that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this more with some gear and actually a conversion that shows how much dollars is spent per second saved. So we'll touch on that soon. Body weight, again, it depends on the terrain. If it's a flat course, body weight doesn't matter too much. But if it is on a grade or there's lots of hills, body weight starts to become more important. So what they've done here is on a flat course, if you decrease your body mass, there's a likely change also in your body surface area, and this therefore changes your drag coefficient, or how much drag, wind resistance there is, because it changes your frontal surface area. So what they've done is they've modeled that if you decrease your body weight by 3 kilograms, for a novice cyclist, you're looking at about a 25-second improvement in your time over that 40 Ks. 25 seconds is quite significant. If you're a trained cyclist, you're looking at about a 21-second improvement in your time by losing that 3 kgs. And for the elite level cyclist, you're looking at about a 19-second decrease in time. So the body mass change by 3 kgs is not so much changing your power output or your power to weight ratio, even though it will. The factor that's changing your performance the most when you decrease your body mass on a flat course is a change in your body surface area, if that makes sense. So the other factor that they looked at was body position. And what they found was that if you refine your body position, you could decrease your time by about 2 to 2.5 minutes, which is significant when you think about it. So for athletes that are looking at saving a lot of time, getting that body position optimized with a good bike setup is key. And largely that's just refining your aerodynamic position, putting on aero bars and getting them set up for you. There's a sort of 2 to 2.5 minute improvement in performance there. So next to training, this here is one of the biggest bang for your buck items that you can get. Thinking about other pieces of gear, because everyone loves new gear, no doubt, and changing them can improve your performance. But by how much, and by how much do you have to pay per second saved? So what I'm going to do now is dig into some data that came from aerodynamic studies in a wind tunnel. And what they show is that your biggest savings are going to come by adding some aero bars. And that goes back to that body position. So if you put some aero bars on there and get set up, the cost is going to be about $1.64 per second that you save. So really good performance improvements with minimal cost. The next biggest bang for your buck is putting on some shoe covers. So if you just put shoe covers on versus no shoe covers, you're going to get about a 30-second improvement in performance over 40 kilometers. And in terms of dollar per savings, you're looking at about $1.67 per second saved. So again, very cost-effective ways of improving your performance here. Then the third best way to improve your performance in terms of cost per second saved is using a skin suit. So this test used a regular jersey and shorts, regular cycling jersey and shorts, and they went to a skin suit. And it was actually the Nike Swift skin suit that they used, not just a standard skin suit, but a standard skin suit is going to help a lot as well. And they improved that 40-kilometer time trial performance by 134 seconds, so just over 2 minutes. And the cost per second saved is around about $1.86. So again, relatively low cost for quite high gains. Moving on from there, the next step up is to an aero helmet. And you're looking, if you just go from a regular road helmet, which is really designed for cooling, and they cool very well to stop you overheating on long rides, but they are not very aerodynamic. So if you go to an aero helmet, you're looking at just over a minute improvement over a 40k time trial course. And what does that work out on average, you're looking at about $3 per second saved. So you can save a second by spending $3 per second on that Aero helmet. From there, the prices start to jump quite considerably. The next thing in terms of bang for your buck are wheels. If you can get a wheel set, you're going to save around about, depending on what the wheel set is, of course, somewhere between 30 to 42 seconds over that 40-kilometer time trial course. And depending on the cost of those wheels, you're looking at somewhere about $16 all the way through to about, $34 per second saved. So there's a rapid jump up when you start to look into these different hardwares, but there are performance gains to be had there. And if you're looking for those marginal gains, this would be a very good place to start. From there, you can jump into a wind tunnel, get some wind tunnel testing done on you. You're going to save about 56 seconds, so just under a minute. The cost of that is quite expensive though, so you're looking at around about $26 per second saved if you're jumping in and doing some wind tunnel testing. So again, these performance improvements are coming with a price tag, so it may only be for our elite level riders. And finally, if you want to really sort of step things up, the biggest expense in terms of seconds saved is actually an aerodynamic frame. If you change to an aerodynamic frame, you're only going to actually save about 17 seconds over a 40-kilometer time trial, which is quite small when you think about it. And when you think about the cost of a frame, that only comes into about $176 per second saved. So if you want to think about where to put your cash when you're looking at improving your performance, there's some tips on different gear. These effects may not be additive. So obviously if you keep improving your performance little bits, by buying all this different gear, doing all these different approaches, eventually you're not going to get down to a point where you don't actually have to start the race because you've already finished in terms of your time savings. You are always going to have to obviously pedal your bike to get there. Some of these may not be additive in terms of a change in your body position, may actually reduce your power output on the bike due to suboptimal joint angle. So although that you're extremely aero, you may not be able to hold that aero position for long, or it might actually impede your power output. So that's where getting someone with a very good understanding of aerodynamics and biomechanics to set your bike up is crucial. And we might try and get someone on the podcast to talk about that in a bit more detail, so you've got a bit more of an understanding about it. As a bit of a summary, it seems that the number one factor that's going to improve your performance the most is training. And I think everyone is probably aware of that, and that's maybe why you're listening to this podcast as well, to understand more about training. However, large improvements can be made through other areas, and some of those areas, in terms of talking bang for your buck, those small changes in body position. So by putting on aero bars, you're getting a massive saving for minimal cost. Also, nailing your carbohydrate intake is key, and also potentially supplementing with caffeine. From there, things start to get a little bit more expensive when we start talking altitude training, and if we start thinking about changing frames and wheels, the price goes up. The amount of improvement that you're getting is actually quite small when you look at it in terms of dollar per second saved. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps in terms of where you're going to put your money in terms of investing to improve performance. Obviously, these improvements solely apply to a time trial, whereas in a road race where there's drafting and tactics come into play, these changes in terms of seconds saved are quite different as well. If you've got any more questions, comments about improving your time trial performance and what you've invested your money in personally, post a comment below. I'm always keen to hear from you guys. Otherwise than that is Lessons from the Lab this week. Let's jump into Lessons from Life. This is a question that I've had a few times over the last few weeks from listeners, and it's also come up in conversation with a couple of the athletes that I coach directly, and that is about this mental toughness, being able to break through that pain barrier. So I thought this would be an ideal topic for lessons from life. It's a really common question that always gets brought up about what's more important, the body or the mind. Now, a lot of people say that, there's 50-50, for the body and the mind, or some even say in elite athletes as much as 90% of it is mental and, 10% is only physical. In actual fact, to be fair, to be at the top of your game, no matter what your level is, it's 100% physical and 100% mental. Any less than this, you're not going to maximize your full potential. And what I really wanted to dig into today is about breaking through that pain barrier. Because endurance sports and physical pain and suffering, if you want to term it that, sort of go hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other. And a lot of people think that as they improve their fitness, it's going to get easier. And the thing is it never actually gets any easier. You just go faster. And what I mean by that is that, yes, if you are sitting on a treadmill or on a bike, stationary bike, and you have got it set at an absolute workload, let's say 10 kilometers an hour on the treadmill, or let's say 150 watts on the bike. As you improve your fitness, it is going to feel easier at that given workload. But when it comes to race day or to training, you're not going to just return to those absolute workloads. You're going to push up into higher, new, relative workloads. So it's always hard. You always are pushing that limit. You're always feeling that pain. The guys and girls at the top of their game, the elites, they feel the same amount of pain, if not more, when they're racing as hard as they possibly can as well. So don't think that you're somehow not normal or you're an exception to the rule. Everyone hurts, everyone suffers. It's those that can suffer the most or push through that pain barrier the most that seem to be the most successful. All animals are designed to avoid pain or gravitate towards comfort. If you think back to our primal roots, it's all about survival. So if we're experiencing pain, there's a natural tendency to want to avoid it, because usually pain is a signal that something is wrong, that something is impending on your survival. However, when we're exercising or training or racing, there is an injury pain, which we always want to avoid. If you're feeling an injury pain, sharp stabbing pains, that feels like an injury, we obviously want to avoid that. But there is a certain level of pain that comes with training and racing hard that is not a negative thing, or at least we don't want to interpret it as a negative thing. We want to be able to embrace that pain and rethink how we are actually interpreting it. So when we start to push hard and your legs start to burn and your lungs are screaming at you, just remember this is not a negative thing. This is a positive pain. It means that you're pushing hard and you're going fast. The harder you push, the more it's going to hurt and the faster you're going to go. So instead of focusing on how much it hurts and how awful it is, try embracing that burning in your legs and see how much you can make it burn. How hard can you push? How much power can you produce? How fast can you go? In cycling and running and pretty much all endurance sports, it seems that there is almost a linear relationship between pain and performance. The faster you go, the more it hurts. Those people that go the fastest can hurt the most. So it's all very well in saying just embrace this pain, But if it is something you can embody, you can use it to great effect. And what I want to do is just dig into a little bit of science around this, so hopefully that helps you reframe your thinking. The human body has a lot of inbuilt survival mechanisms and a lot of redundancy built into it to prolong and maximize our chance of survival. And one of those survival mechanisms is that your body is governed by the mind, the central governor theory. Now, there's some research out there that shows that when you feel that you're at your maximum, you cannot physically push any harder, you're only actually at 80% of your true max. 80% of your true max. And no doubt you've heard stories of, mothers finding superhuman strength to lift like a car wreck off their trapped children, or unthinkable feats of endurance in survival situations. In these cases, people are able to tap into that extra 20%. In the sporting world, you can see this all the time at the finish line, where those who have hit the wall, say an hour ago, and have been creeping along, are able to put in a sprint finish. If they had really hit the wall, reached their physical capacity, they should not have been able to put in a sprint finish. And then there's the opposite to that, where you see the top performers who collapse multiple times in the final kilometre of a race, but they get up and keep staggering on and collapse again. Get back up, keep staggering on and collapse again. There's some brilliant footage of Hawaii Ironman. I can't remember what year it is, but these two athletes sprinting to the line on their hands and knees, collapsing, getting up, crawling, sprinting, trying to do anything, staggering towards the line. These people have found that true physical limit of their bodies. Their mind has allowed their body to tap into that extra 20%. So if you really want it and you're prepared to suffer for it, that extra 20% is there. It's there for you. It's there for the taking. So how do we tap into it? It's really hard to think when you're going maximal that you've still got another 20% left, because you're on your limit. It hurts. Everything hurts. And to think you've still got 20%, how are you going to tap into that? Well, what I really like to do is get athletes to work on their mental skills during and using physical practice. I usually find athletes are very physical in nature. They like doing. So if you give them an exercise, say to sit down and go through some mental skills, they can't grasp that concept very well. But when you're out there doing it, incorporating mental skills into your training, I find that's very, very effective. So here is what we're going to do. During your next interval session, what I want you to do is, when it feels like you're pushing hard, you're hurting, you're at your max, just think to yourself that you've still got 20% in that reserve, and I want you to focus on pushing into that 20%. But rather than going the whole hog and just going 20% harder, I just want you to focus on picking it up 1%. Just go 1% harder. If you're on the bike, just bring that pedal speed up 1%. If you're running, just push 1% harder. If that 1% is too much for you to handle, I just want you to push 0.5% harder in that moment. Just 0.5%. Just a bit harder than what you were previously going. This makes that 20% a lot more manageable. Start chipping away. Start eating in to that 20%, 1% at a time. So I really like to use this in the final stages of intervals, and just try pushing that 1% harder or 0.5% harder every 10 seconds. Or if it's a short interval session, or if it's a longer interval session, try building 0.5% more, every 30 seconds. Work a little harder, dig a little deeper, and that's going to help you develop your physical performance, because you're training harder, obviously, but it's going to also go a really, really long way to developing your mental ability to push through that physical pain. Also in race day, think to yourself, am I going the hardest, most sustainable intensity that I can right now? Now, I'm not suggesting that you want to go, all out and sprint the whole race, because that's impossible. But are you going as hard and as fast as you can sustainably right at this minute? Would you be able to lift it 0.5%, 1%? If you can, then do it. If not, keep digging in where you are. It's all about developing that ability to suffer. Now, I use that word suffer in an interesting way, because a lot of people always talk about, the suffer fest, how hard it was. They were just suffering through, long endurance races, whatever it might be. But when you really think about it, you're not suffering really at all. First of all, you chose to be there, so it's your fault, so take ownership of it. And second of all, you can make that suffering stop at any time. Just stop. Stop running, stop riding, you're done. It's stopped. And when you actually think of real suffering in the real world, you're not in a war zone. You've got plenty of food to eat. You've got fresh water. All of these things that we term suffering in sport, are really very minute in the scheme of things. So don't blow your pain during training and racing, up into this big suffer fest. It's very controllable. You're in charge of it. You're responsible for it. So take ownership of it and embrace it, because it's not pain, it's speed and it's power. So if you can reframe those thoughts in your mind, it goes a long, long way to being able to push harder. Now, these are concepts that have come from the Performance Temple Psychology ebook, and this is part of the Performance Temple series. If you want to download a free copy of the Performance Temple Introduction, just head over to the Exponential Performance Coaching website, and that's simply www.exponentialperformancecoaching.com, and you'll find a free download there on the homepage. If you want to download a copy of the extended Performance Temple Psychology Handbook, you can do that for only $2. What I'm going to do is in the show notes over at Exponential Performance Coaching, under the podcast, under this episode, I'm going to put a link where you can get the Performance Temple Psychology Handbook for only $2. And what you're going to learn on that is some more strategies to push through that pain, how to control your nerves, and how to harden up and bring your mind up to the same level as your body, so that on race day you can achieve your peak performance. So that psychology handbook is usually $7, so we're giving you that to you for $2 if you head over and check that out. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes over at the Exponential Performance website. That's it. That's lessons from life for today. Done.
Hi Maddie, Ant Jackson here. First time caller, long time listener. Been loving your podcast, keep it up. Hey, I've got a quick question for you. Just wondering, why do you use a mountain bike on these brevets and endurance bike packing races as opposed to the likes of a cycle cross bike, which you can use, on the light off-road type stuff? Love to hear your answer. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers for your question, Ant. So when I do these, all the bike packing brevets that I've done in the past, I have used a mountain bike, and that's been a 29-inch carbon frame Giant XTC1. And if you want to check out my full setup, I will post a link over on the show notes at exponentialperformancecoaching.com under the episode 7 podcast, where I go through all of the gear that I take, including my bike, tyres, and my full setup. So if you want to check that out, go over and check them out at the show notes. But why do I use a mountain bike? There are some people that use cyclocross bikes, and in the length of New Zealand, the Tour of Aotearoa, 3,000 kilometres from Cape Reinga all the way down to Bluff at the bottom of New Zealand, there were a couple of riders who used cyclocross bikes, and they performed quite well. There was quite a lot of rough off-road terrain, and when I was riding and I was thinking, man, I'm glad I'm on a mountain bike here. And also, there were a lot of people on mountain bikes that had a rigid front fork, a rigid carbon fork, and I was pleased that I had some suspension up the front on front fork, because some of the terrain was super rough. So I guess the main reason why I use a mountain bike is because the going is so rough. While you are faster on the road, the body takes an absolute beating even on a mountain bike over this rough stuff. So I imagine on a cyclocross bike you'd be beaten up quite badly. In terms of the Great Southern Brevet, I don't think from memory there was anybody riding a cyclocross bike. It's just not suited to cyclocross bike really at all. It's mainly really, really rough, with a few flat, smooth sections of joining roads in between, but mostly it's just big, rugged, tough terrain that if you were on a cyclocross bike, you'd be pushing it to its limit in terms of its strength and ability to take the knocks, and then also you'd be pushing yourself to the limit in terms of riding, but also just soaking up the extra bumps and the rough stuff and just destroying your upper body and your lower body from it. I know a lot of guys ride like a dropped bar mountain bike, so I've still got the chunkier mountain bike tyres on it, but it's actually got a sort of a cyclocross bar setup. They call them wood chipper bars, and that seems to provide really nice, comfortable hand position for long hours in the saddle. But yeah, for me, I personally use a mountain bike. The Kiwi Brevet, which runs out of Blenheim every second year here in New Zealand, I know a lot of people use cyclocross bikes on that Brevet simply because there's long road sections and short rough sections, so it's quite well suited to a cyclocross bike. But the brevets that I've done seem to be better suited for a mountain bike. Lots of rough stuff with minimal long smooth sections that are more suited to a cyclocross bike between them. So I hope that answers your question, and definitely get over and check out all of my gear setup for both the Tour of Aotearoa and the Great Southern Brevet. I've got everything in there, it's all laid out. Just remember, if you've got any questions, please send them in via voice message and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope you found today's episode of the Exponential Performance Podcast helpful. Please, if you have any questions at all, send me through a voice message. If you send me through a voice question, what I'm going to do is give you a free copy of the Exponential Performance Handbook series. So rather than having to buy it with the offer that I just gave you for the Psychology Handbook, you can get all of them for free just by sending me in a voice question. I love to hear from you guys. If you haven't done so already, make sure you get over and check out the Exponential Performance Coaching Facebook page. I post lots of updates on there, so make sure you don't miss out on anything by going over and hitting the like button on there. So until next time, get out there and train hard, but most importantly, train smart. Connect with your training, ask questions, keep investigating. How can you refine things to keep improving your performance? Not just physically, but also mentally. And I look forward to chatting with you next week.